More revelations at the COVID inquiry. Two of Boris Johnson's closest aides during the start of the pandemic, Dominic Cummings and Lee Cain, are due to give evidence today.
Utterly devastated, the words of Matthew Perry's co-stars on Friends, describing his death as an unfathomable loss.
Good morning. Watchdogs representing train passengers will give their verdict today on controversial plans to close hundreds of railway station ticket offices. But will that affect the final decision? I'll explain what happens next.
Police in Colombia are continuing their search for the father of Liverpool striker Luis Diaz. The footballer's father and mother were kidnapped on Saturday by gunmen in the city of Barracas near the Caribbean. Police say Diaz's mother was rescued, but his father's remains with the criminals. Colombia's police is offering a reward of almost $49,000 for information that leads to the whereabouts of the football's father. It's an incredible story. But what else is making news for you? Well, thousands of patients on NHS England waiting list will be given the opportunity to travel to other hospitals in the country for earlier treatment. So any patient waiting longer than 40 weeks who doesn't have an appointment within the next 8 weeks will receive a letter or a text or an email from their hospital. The proposal will be offered to up to 400,000 eligible patients. Shop price inflation has eased for the fifth month in a row, its lowest rate since last August. Figures from the British Retail Consortium show prices were 5.2% higher in October than a year earlier. That's compared with 6.2% in September. Now, food inflation also slowed, coming down to its lowest level since July last year. A group of families who have been affected by failures in NHS maternity care have sent a letter to the Health Secretary, that's Steve Barclay, calling for a full statutory public inquiry into maternity services in England. Barnsley Hospital apologised to a mother whose daughter died in 2022 after staff mistakenly monitored her heart rate instead of the baby's. Now, the chief executive of the hospital says the death should not have happened and accepts findings of the independent investigation.
It's robbed me of my trust of medical professionals, my faith in humanity, but it's also enraging because Beatrice's death was preventable and the people who were working there as clinicians, but also managers in the hospital, knew that there were these problems.
Police in West Yorkshire say they're investigating a serving officer over allegations he shared racist and misogynistic content in a WhatsApp group with colleagues. Sky News has exclusively seen the content and messages on a device that was handed to the force 18 months ago.
King Charles and Queen Camilla are beginning their state visit to Kenya today, their first trip to a Commonwealth country since becoming monarchs. The royal tour comes as the East African nation celebrates the 60th anniversary of its independence. Two former RAF bases in Essex and in Lincolnshire are at the centre of a judicial review in the High Court today after the government proposed to house asylum seekers at the disused military sites. Local councils have challenged the plans and campaigners have staged protests. The Home Office, though, says they have met the planning requirements. Hundreds of thousands of patients who've been waiting more than 40 weeks for treatment on the NHS in England are to be offered the option of getting seen in another part of the country. NHS England hopes it will help unlock some of the worst bottlenecks in the system. And assisted dying on the Isle of Man could move a step closer as draft legislation is debated in its parliament. The plans would see residents with a terminal illness and no more than 6 months to live given the right to end their lives with help. If the bill becomes law, the island would be the first part of the British Isles to legalise the practice. Right, in the last few minutes, the energy giant BP has released its third quarter results. Ben can tell us what they are. Morning.
Yes, morning. We are used to big numbers when we get the financial results from these energy giants, but BP's profits between July and September are actually significantly lower than they were in the same period last year. Now, the company made £2.7 billion in profits. That's down from over £7 billion in the same 3 months last year. So it's less than half. Now, it's mainly down to wholesale energy prices continuing to fall from the highs they hit last year. Remember, oil and gas had spiked dramatically after Russia invaded Ukraine. It has been a turbulent time for BP after the chief executive quit unexpectedly in September. That was after the board said it was investigating his alleged personal relationships with colleagues. Now, while BP's profits are down, as I say, compared with last year's July to September, many will still consider £2.7 billion in profit to be a big number at a time when households and businesses are still facing high energy bills as we move into the winter. Remember, there is a windfall tax still in place on energy firm profits, and that remains in place until March 2028. But you can expect to hear more discussion around that ahead of next year's general election.
Figures looking at the first month of the expansion of the ultra-low emission zone show that Transport for London were making over £5 million a week from drivers entering the zone. Even so, TfL say that 95% of vehicles in the area which circles London are now being ULEZ compliant. The controversial expansion at the end of August is aimed at improving air quality. There are concerns that the biodiversity in Richmond Park will be harmed if more planes start to fly over it, as proposed by Heathrow Airport. Analysis by Friends of Richmond Park found that under the current proposals, as many as 60,000 flights could pass over the park every year. Heathrow said no decision has been made as to which airspace and which flight path any modernisation plans will actually take.
The Eye today is reporting on what it calls a landmark day at the COVID inquiry. The paper says that the Cabinet Secretary, Simon Case, accused Boris Johnson of making it impossible for the UK to tackle the virus. We'll hear from the inquiry about what happens today a bit later.
The Times also leads on that inquiry into the pandemic, highlighting the comments made by Sir Patrick Vallance, who described Mr Johnson in his private diary as flip-flopping.
But the paper leads with a story from the COVID inquiry, which Dominic Cummings is set to give evidence to. That's later today. The Mirror also leads on the inquiry with the headline "Tragic Joke," referencing comments a former advisor made about his leadership. The Times has a story about ministers having to overrule civil servants at the Foreign Office after they suggested banning Israel from an upcoming artificial intelligence regulation talks. And the Metro leads with the headline "Saved from the storm," alongside a picture of a couple narrowly avoiding being swept out to sea in Yorkshire as Storm Ciarán looks set to bring disruption across the UK. And the Sun leads on Portuguese police apologising to the parents of Madeleine McCann for the handling of their daughter's case. And the front page of the Daily Star asks whether Uranus could be key to helping scientists discover alien life. There you go. And if you want to see any of those front pages again or read the stories, scan the QR code on the screen.